And how has your world been, both professionally and with the choir and family, however you want to answer this, but during the last 18 months where you probably had to do a lot remotely? I know you did a lot
Yeah.
remotely, but
One thing that was interesting was um, I looked at our calendar in March of 2020, and every single day had like 20 things on it, right?
yep.
And then I looked in April, May as we got further into that, and there wasn't one thing on there.
Hmm.
So that is kind of telling, right?
Yeah.
Like we went from just you couldn't fit another thing in, the typical crazy just zooming to kind of hanging out and less formal, appointments on our calendar.
Hmm.
That's one thing. Yeah, so I think for us, at least for me, it actually slowed down a bit and became a little more peaceful, a little less chaotic for me. I think also I was one of few who were working remotely, and it was somewhat suspect back in those days, and now it's the norm. So I
Hmm.
I don't have to like, hide the fact that I'm, in my office at home. Or I wasn't hiding it, but it just, was I was the different one, and now I'm the normal one.
Mm.
So
Okay,
that's
yeah.
that's kind of nice. I've kind of liked that, and
Right.
I just think so many things have happened where before it was abnormal, and we didn't really have the skills, and now we do have those skills to do our work without traveling to
Hmm.
work.
Yeah.
So those are a few things. Trying to think what else. I mean, I think under every roof, there are wonderful good times, and there's also problems, that people deal with, and particularly in a from an emotional and spiritual and social perspective, maybe. Um, I think for me, from a physical perspective, am finding more time to get on the treadmill and go on walks with my wife and things like that.
Hmm.
So, but I think from a emotional, spiritual, social perspective, it feels to me like there's more struggles than there maybe have been. Well, I think it's kind of even before COVID, it was going up. I used to be the vice president of student services and planning and IT and a few other things at UVU. But because student services had most of the employees, that's where I spent most of my time.
Hmm.
And and in those days, this would have been 10, 15 years ago. Actually longer than that. It would have been 15, 20 years ago. In those days, we had health services, we had mental health services. But
Yeah.
when I talked to the VP of student services at USU, it's just skyrocketed for students at campuses. It's it's not even, I mean, it's not even recognizable from when I was there. Now, um, probably, I don't know what the percentage is, but the resources that go into, the whole person, the whole student,
Hmm.
it just is just gone from like 0 to 100. And the the numbers of suicides, attempted suicides, again, almost 0 to 100. Not exactly, but just
Right.
a huge increase in mental health services, in struggles that we're all feeling. And I'm just kind of curious about that, because we've always had those situations, but I'm not sure how much of it is just we're addressing it now where we weren't before, versus how much of it is an increase in people feeling lost, feeling alone, feeling confused, feeling. Um, I would add this, and this comes from this VP at USU over students, feeling that if I'm not perfect, life's not worth living.
Mm.
Those were his words. I don't necessarily see that as much, but if I don't get an A in my class, or if I don't have the right dates, or if I don't, if I'm not, performing at this almost unrealistic expectation, then um, I'm a failure and life's not worth living, kind of a
Yeah.
thing. So that's something that I think is interesting. That's, I think, only been accelerated by some of the changes that have happened through COVID.
Hmm. I'm glad you brought that up because it has been a subject spoken of a few times. It's like, well, has this always existed and just nobody talked about it, or is it a bigger issue
Mhm.
nowadays, right? And I don't know what the correct answer is quite yet, but
Yeah.
with so many people talking about it now, from athletes to just schools and everybody saying, "Oh, okay, we can talk about it." It's back to your comment of remote working. It happened. People worked remote, but you kind of hit it because you're like, well, I don't know
Right.
what people are going to think of me, right?
Yeah. Right. Right.
But it is
Yeah.
encouraging to see that people are willing to talk about it. And
Yes.
and so now I'm just trying to, what's the word, sort through how people are talking about it. Because there
Hmm.
is the side of, well, mental health means you're broken. You have the equivalent of a broken leg, or you have a disease, as opposed to,
Right.
like you were saying, the whole self. We all have mental health. Let's learn how to take care of it properly.
Yeah. 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 So Ben, what you just brought to mind is this idea of, I think in my own life, to what extent can I try and balance things, right? I mean, that's always, I kind of think of somebody on a tightrope. They're really never in balance. They're always balancing, right? They're,
Yes.
sorry, you can't see my hands, but I'm doing this with the imaginary pole. But it's very rarely that they're balanced. They're always unbalanced and becoming more balanced.
Hmm.
And I see that as kind of a metaphor for my life. How am I doing in the various aspects that I care about? And so, always trying to readjust. And I think that if I were to teach my kids one thing, that life is about balancing and readjusting and rebalancing.
Yeah. So from your experience, both, growing up, or what you teach, or what you've seen taught in all of your professional experience, is it often a mindset of, well, we just don't talk about emotions? Emotions are, things that you experience in your private life, but we don't talk about them? Or is it something that's addressed? How have you
Yeah,
most often
I
seen it?
think so. A few thoughts come to mind. I think different people grow up in different family cultures around that issue.
Hmm.
So in my family culture, I'm becoming more aware that it's uncomfortable, or it's just not done to air your secret stuff that you're
Hmm.
you're frustrated with. And in my wife's family, it's kind of easier because there's not an expectation that everything's perfect. In fact, there's an expectation that things are just out of whack. So it's interesting bringing those two family cultures together, where my wife calls it the win spin, where everything, doesn't matter what happens, it's, all for the good, and it's great, and, everybody's happy. And interestingly, that little movie, was it a Disney or a Pixar, Inside Out? Have
Oh,
you
I
heard of
love that
that?
movie. Yes.
So anyway, it really kind of changed my threshold for being sad. Do you remember Joy had to go around and make everybody happy? And that's what as I saw that character, that's what I was doing with my kids and my wife. I was the fixer, and oh no, something's wrong, and I'm jumping in and trying to. And then there was that moment where they kind of sat with the sadness, and it kind of changed for me. I think for the better for my kids, that it's okay if things aren't going perfectly. So I think that's a couple of thoughts that come to mind as far as how we talk about it. I think professionally, when I put myself with my professional hat on, I think people are more comfortable speaking about it, and I'm comfortable speaking about it. My brother and I were talking about this kind of family culture thing, and he teaches down in Salt Lake, they brought a speaker in. She was a psychologist, and she had the kids. These were middle school kids. She handed out paper bags to them, and my brother was just like, "Oh no! In middle school, we don't hand things out because the paper bags were on their head and they were throwing in everything." So he's got this idea that in middle school we maintain everything very carefully. But she handed out these paper bags, and she said, "Okay, write on the outside of the paper bag all the things that are going well and the things that you think are great, and what how your life is doing from a strengths or positive perspective." And then she gave him a little card, and she said, "Now put down the things that inside might be struggles for you, or things that you're concerned about, or things that you are ashamed about, or whatever." So they did this, and then she said, "This is kind of like life." And she said, in order to have meaningful relationships with others, a trusting relationship allows you to be vulnerable, and you can talk a little bit about some of the things that are on the inside of that paper bag. And I
Hmm.
kind of like that analogy. I just, he just told me this a week ago, and he said, one of the on the way out, I guess one of the little kids in cards fell out, and it fell on the floor, and Chris, my brother, saw it. But my brother.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and he acted like he did, and then she quickly hid it back into her lunch bag, her paper bag. But he told me that what it said is what she had on hers is that "I'm stupid," is what she had written and put inside her.
Hmm.
And it just how that just he felt so bad about that. But I think it's good for us to have trusting relationships where we can, in a safe place, talk about those. My wife has 4 childhood friends. They get together for birthdays. So they get together, like 4 times a year. And it's just this dump of really sad things that have gone on. You would think a birthday party would be, but they just use that opportunity just to talk about broken dreams and sorrows and just really hard things. And I think that's wonderful. She has that. I don't know that a lot of us have those. I had, I've had a couple of really hard things happen in my life. And recently I just didn't know what to do. And I just found a guy in the neighborhood, and I just teared up, and I just said, I just have to talk to somebody. I have nobody to talk to. And I just let out, all these things that I was worried about and my concerns. And it was a safe relationship. I felt like I could, but I rarely do that. I guess there's been, very few times that I've been willing to open up and just tell my true feelings. To my wife, I can,
Hmm.
right? But anyway, so those are some thoughts that come to mind when we think about how we talk about this at the university. I just went through sexual harassment training, and I'm a reporting officer because I have an administrative position.
Hmm.
What that means is if somebody comes to me and talks to me about where they have had some kind of sexual harassment, I am required by policy of the university to report that to the sexual harassment office. I'm not sure how exactly I feel about that, because I think that, what I'm supposed to do in this training is if somebody starts talking, I'm supposed to stop them and say, "Now you need to know that whatever you say, I'm required to report to this office. So do you want to continue talking?" I think, this has come from Title IX, federal kinds of
Right.
guidelines. And I'm wondering, I'm sure there's people a lot smarter than me that are behind this, but I think there's pros and cons in that, right?
For sure. No, that's interesting. 2 points real quick. So let's come back to this subject of the sexual harassment policy, but real quick
Yeah.
about the paper bags that you were saying. So I imagine the card full of the personal insecurities goes inside the bag, right?
Yeah.
So we're all carrying around a bag and with something inside of it. But since we only see the outside of everybody else's bags, we quickly forget that anybody has a card inside, right?
Yeah.
So
Right.
then, so we think I'm the only one with the card. I can feel it. I know it. I wrote it. I'm always thinking about it. And we
Right.
ignore the outside of our bags, right?
Right. Right. And
That's
we
a,
we make assumptions that everybody else's life, and of course social media I was really surprised in the Wall Street Journal, because I read the Wall Street Journal all the time, every day, that they did this kind of, it almost didn't feel like business news. It almost felt like an expose, which is really unusual for the Wall Street Journal. But they had a whistleblower from Facebook who had worked there, who was supposed to be helping them figure out how to take, figure out how, so that Facebook is not adding to emotional distress. And in fact, they had all this data that said that the way their algorithms are written, it is adding to emotional distress, especially for young women. Because all you see is, the glamorous stuff, and somehow through the algorithms, what they're clicking through even feeds that. And so it's the same thing as the paper bag, right? I mean, all I see is everybody else's glorious days and how they're, things are going well. And this is not new news, but it was new news to me in a bit, because I have a little family group chat and I like to take a lot of pictures, and my kids are just driving crazy. But everything that we do, we have to get a picture, right? And then I have to send it out on our little family group chat. And I started thinking, to what extent am I sending only the outside of the paper bag?
Right.
It's 100%. So I even wonder if somehow, as a parent, I need to be a little more careful about what I'm communicating. Everything's glamorous, everything's perfect. Particularly growing up in that family culture that has a hard time allowing a safe space for in a safe way for me and my siblings to talk about what we know is just hard things are going on, but we just don't talk about that a lot.
Right. No, I have so many thoughts right now. One, to the subject of, well, is this new, or is it something that just more talked about? Let's talk about the social media factor for a second, right? If we lived before social media, where the outside of everybody's paper bags is less commonly visible, then we live in our circle and we say, okay, I see my family, I relate with my family, it's fine, we're good. But then when we compare only others' best to our worst, then yes, that's where a lot of insecurities and I'm not perfect, so why live?
Yeah, right.
Where those thoughts come up. And then if you remember, you brought this up with Inside Out, and where joy is trying to control everything, but sadness has to play a part. And when she finally feels sadness, it gives two examples, but the one later in the movie when she goes back to her parents and cries. Do you remember what happens right after that with her and her parents?
I don't.
So she goes into her house very scared, right? Because she just stole her mom's credit card, took a bus, and then backtracked and walked home. And so her mind's going, I don't know what my parents are going to do. I hate myself. I hate this move. I'm scared. And she walks in with her head down and she starts crying. And she could be expecting the parents to get upset and say, why the heck did you do that? I can't believe you. We taught you better. You stole our credit card. Now we're going to have to go to consequences. But they were just so happy to have her back that they encircled her in their arms and they cried together.
Yeah.
And because they experienced sadness together, then it turned into a joyful memory.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I couldn't agree more that I think in one case in my daughter's life where we cried together, that to her, she's mentioned, is the time she connected with her dad the most.
Yes. So cool.
And it's a very, very meaningful experience for both of us.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when and again, I live in kind of an educational world, so I'm sorry I'm always talking about students.
Okay.
But so just a quick background. I did my bachelor's degree at Purdue, got an engineering degree, worked as an engineer for a while with the Space Shuttle Booster Program, and then ended up getting a doctorate in organizational behavior. So I switched out of a technical role and an engineering role into a management and leadership role. And after that, I was in a consulting firm for a while. And then when I was 18 years old, I went to Rick's College and I played the saxophone, and I got on this little touring group. And so we got on a bus and we toured around America for a year, where we had this little band and performing group. And so we toured for, sorry, did I say year? I meant a month. And they brought along a vice president from the college. And since we had a lot of bus time, I got to sit by him and I got to know him, and he was so cool. And I decided then and there I wanted to be a college vice president, because in my mind, I thought that's what they did. They went on tour. And so that little 18-year-old dream drove me through my engineering career, through my consulting. I ended up working with Mike Leavitt, former governor of Utah, with the higher ed system, and then an assistant commissioner with the regents that kind of govern the system of higher ed for the public universities and colleges. And then I got my first opportunity at UVU and then at Snow to be a vice president. So I kind of, that 18-year-old dream, normally nothing would last that long, but that lasted for a long time. And I actually did get to go on tour with a performing group once.
Yeah,
but
very
anyway,
cool. See how dreams
but
happen?
that was not most of it. But that's a little bit about my background. But that's how I kind of ended up in higher education. But back to the student world I live in. You may or may not remember that at BYU in the Marriott School of Management, they had a suicide. A young student jumped off of like the 7th story in this building at BYU, and I was singing in the Tabernacle Choir at the time, and I think the faculty senate president was sitting next to me from BYU, and he had written a letter to students there at BYU saying, "Hey, you're more than just a grade to me. You're more than just a number to me. You are a person to me, and just know that as a faculty member, if you want to talk about stuff, I care." And so one of the things I did was I had him send me that letter, and I then in my classes, and I still do this in all of my classes, somewhere midway through my class, I send out a similar kind of message where I say, I know getting a good grade is important, but it's not everything. And let me tell you how I feel about I know that a lot of us struggle, and I kind of try and open up that opportunity. I've never had anybody take advantage of that. I mean, to come forward and talk to me about their problems, but I've had a lot of people who say, you know what, just the fact that you recognize that, and you need to know that I struggle with depression or with discouragement or with a whole bunch of other things, and that meant a lot to me. So again, I think I'm trying as a human being to open opportunities for people to share the inside of their paper bag a little bit.
Yes.
It's a long way for me to go, because that's not naturally where I've been. I've just kind of through my youth and my early adulthood, it was just, we have to be happy, pound, 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 and we're going to do everything we can to have that as a goal. And I decided maybe that's not the end all goal, that maybe the goal is to experience all kinds of emotions, and that's okay, and to maybe be a little more feeling like putting off the persona and putting off the impression that I really feel in my heart, that it's okay to have different emotions and we can sit with those for a while.
Right.
Just some thoughts.
No, thank you. And I was going to share the vibe I always got from you, especially during my program, was that you cared about the person even more than this fantastic program, where we learned a lot and it was excellent education, but you were always open to talk to. And when we were frustrated about maybe the way somebody was teaching or the program itself, you listened. And we very much felt, and I can speak for some others too, because I had these conversations with other students. It was important to us to feel that way, because yes, as an executive in the executive program, you have a lot of pressures, and then, we're generally successful people. So sure, we want to get an A and we want this to be great, but you made it very easy to not have extra pressure, because we just felt like, okay, I'm seen, I'm heard, and I'm okay.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. I appreciate that. That's a newer goal for me.
There you go. Well, you're already on it. Good job.
Thank you.
So let's wrap up with one or two more subjects. Going back to the sexual harassment policy that you're mentioning, right?
Yeah.
Now I'm just going to throw out my opinion on that, if I
Yeah.
can, even though I don't know a whole lot about the situation, right?
Right.
But learning what I've learned, both in my HR executive experience and with policies and everything else, yes, we do want to protect ourselves, and we do want to say, okay, if you're telling me that I'm going to report it, so that we can protect ourselves and say, yes, I knew about it and I did something about it. But at the same time, somebody coming forth and sharing something like that, they're living with big emotions, fear and
Yeah.
shame,
Yeah.
insecurity, and I don't know if I'm safe. And my opinion is they first need to get those emotions out
Yeah.
before any solution can happen, right?
Right. Right.
So
Right.
so the biggest thing we can do is give them a safe place, give them, I forget if I'm using the right term or not, but it's just giving space for them
Yeah.
to express how they're feeling in a safe environment. And then we say, yeah, if there's something we need to do about it, we're absolutely going to, but I want you to know that you're okay.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. And so that's why that's a little interesting to me. And again, I have not followed how they got to that point, but I do know that it stems from there were some issues in I think the College of Arts or something at USU, and there was an investigation through Title IX, and they came in and there was some very serious "you will do this" kind of stuff. And I don't think the purpose of me saying to them I have to report this is to protect me. I think the purpose of it is to make sure that it doesn't just sit with me and is not um, elevated to a resource that can really help them. That's
Mhm.
the theory behind it. The problem with the theory behind it is that it may shut down and keep that card inside the paper bag, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
But it will at the same time give them an opportunity to know that there are professional resources that are available that can keep things confidential, and that they, yeah, and I'm required to talk to them about that and to even walk them over to that place if that's what they need, kind of thing.
Yeah. So I don't know if you do this already, but would it help or to explain the process to them a little bit so they're not like, oh my
Maybe
goodness,
so.
everybody's going to know.
Yeah, yeah. So that's a really important part that I hadn't thought of, Ben. So I think in that same point where I say, hey, I need to let you know, but then I maybe talk a little bit about potentially the reason behind that
Yeah.
and what
Always
those
striving.
resources are.
Yeah, always striving for that safe environment. So yeah, I'm here for you. Let's keep talking about it, but just wanted to
Yeah,
let you know what I'm going to do about it for your benefit, kind of thing, right?
yeah. As we bring this conversation maybe out of academia into the work world, I'm a senior editor for People and Strategy, which is SHRM's executive network journal. So
Mhm.
SHRM has an executive network for kind of higher end, larger company HR executives, and we have this journal that's aimed at that audience. And so I've written now about 30 articles for them. And every issue we do, we put out a quarterly issue. We have a theme, and one of them was called. I don't think we ended up titling it. I think we ended up titling it "Employee Activism." But the before the marketing people got a hold of it, we called it "The Democratization of Work," where
Hmm.
instead of me being an employee, I'm a citizen of my company. And when whether it's Black Lives Matter or whatever, I have an opinion as a citizen of my company of how my company president should respond. And so it's kind of employee activism, but I think it's a little that we see, um, whether it's climate change or whether it's whatever, that employees have opinions and they want to, particularly the new generations, want to work for a company that has certain values. And so, and they want those, to be a part of a company that does more than just make money. And hopefully their values align with my values as an employee. But what my article was on is, as HR professionals, we kind of went through this and are going through this idea that we want you to be able to bring your whole self to work, right? But then when people bring their whole selves to work, we kind of say, whoa, not your whole self.
Exactly.
so, so, so then, there's this issue of, to what extent are we welcoming of people's whole selves, and to what extent are we saying, in a community, we have certain, ways, and you don't get to make all the decisions as an employee, but we want your input, and we want your your background, your diversity, your experience, and we want your contributions. Um, and we have community norms that set some kind of parameters. So that was a fun article to write. I interviewed I teamed up with a professor from the Kellogg School. Oh no, it was Wharton, and we kind of talked about the democratization of work. And so that's another piece of, I think it fits in our conversation, Ben, because it goes to this notion of, to what extent can I really be myself at work, and what to extent am I welcomed, and does anybody care about what's going on inside of me, right?
Mm,
And I think that in this day and age, the great companies do care about the whole self, and they do try and find places and ways that are welcoming of of my emotional and my spiritual and my social needs, as well as my ability to contribute.
yes. Wow. Thank you. That's powerful stuff. So to wrap up,
Yeah,
oh, okay. I didn't know if you froze. Anyway, to wrap up, I think this is so great because you can speak from a perspective of looking back what I've learned and how it's changed, but also from I'm still learning and here's what I want to do. So if you could give any last piece of advice specifically to the HR world, HR leaders, what would you say? You're like, you know what, if you could do this, or I wish it was this way, or just you're okay. What would
yeah,
be your advice to them?
yeah. So the first thing that comes to mind is what you just said. I think being willing to learn and grow is huge, because and I'll tell you who influences me as much as anybody. It's my kids, because I love them, and they bring to me an idea that doesn't initially sit well with me. But as I sit with that for a while, I think, you know what? I'm probably a little bit boxed in here, and I can learn and grow. So that's
Mhm.
number one. Find ways that you can safely learn and grow. Um, and I would say, um, it's funny, this thought just came to me. So the most common answer I get when somebody applies for the Masters of Human Resources program, when I was the director there, was, because I love people. And I would just go, well, if you love people, HR is going to make you hate them. There's a lot more to HR than just I love people. It's not always
Mhm.
the fun place to be, right?
Right.
When it comes, because it's really the people problems area
Yeah.
in some cases. But I'm gonna change my attitude. Speaking of learning and growing, I think that if you don't have a natural love for people, try and get one. Because to me, if you really want to be a person that can help be part of the solution to some of the struggles that people have at work, just having a natural love for people, a genuine, authentic love for people, I think will take you a long way.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Brad. Again, this has been such a pleasure. You've shared some awesome, especially analogies too. Stories help a lot in us understanding this subject. So I really appreciate it. And so thank you again.
Ben, looks like you're doing great in your life, and I'm sure that you've also got your own inside stuff. But I'm just really pleased to be your friend and to have a chance to be with you today. Thank you. Thanks for what you're doing.
No problem.